Welcome to this episode of the Best Hopes podcast. I'm Adam Thrower.
And I'm Cecil Walker.
And today we are going to talk about yet another slice of the hope pie. Today we're going to be talking about the concept of hope as it relates to dream, or dreaming, I guess. And as we usually start out, I'll give you a couple of synonyms that kind of kick us off. The synonyms that came up for the word dream are design or wish, which are kind of interesting words in and of themselves. Mm-hmm. So, Cecil, what do you make of hope as a dream?
I think we need a new format where so we get a guest or something and someone else tackles the first question.
Maybe next season we'll bring in a guest.
Well, I'll give you, I guess my usual is first impressions, and then I do think there's something interesting about these synonyms. Just the word dream in and of itself, I don't think I would have automatically thought of as a way of describing or expressing hope. But I think of dream in its iterations throughout lots of different creative uses of it and metaphorical uses of it, like so many poems and songs and images and movies that use dream as you've got to follow this thing, this image of what you want or what's right or what's to come. And I think all of the instances of this imagery of a dream as something you want from the future, all the images of this, all the uses of this imagery seem to be steeped in an understanding that there is a place you need to get to or a time you need to arrive at that is important to you. And I don't think we've emphasized something just being inherently important and that being enough of a draw so far yet in our conversations, at least not as overtly as I can remember it. And that stands out a bit to me, that to have a dream of something, that makes me think of people who move to a new place and they have a dream for what that future could hold for them, or a child having a dream for their future, or I guess, as we've seen, historical and political figures have dreams of what's the change that could come to their community or to their country or whatever it is, obviously the most famous Martin Luther King's dream. So yeah, all of that, I guess, is just circling around this idea of it feels like it's alluding to something significant, something important that you're harboring. And if I haven't said it already, it kind of feels like what's inherently true about that dream is that you can't just let that do nothing. You can't just let that disappear. You can't ignore that or let it evaporate or pretend like that has no weight in your life or no relevance to the future that you're approaching. Martin Luther King's thing wasn't, I have a dream and that might be nice, but who knows? Let's keep going. It was, this is imperative. This is important. And whether or not we see it in my lifetime, we've got to do something about this thing. That's what strikes me first.
I really like that imagery that you're alluded to or even developed. A word that kind of kept coming to my mind as you were talking is oftentimes in stories or poems or whatever, when they have this dream, it's accompanied by the story itself is the journey. Mm-hmm. That people kind of have this idea, they have this dream, they have this thing that they're trying to achieve. And then as the story unfolds, we get to see the journey that they take in order to achieve that dream or arrive at that destination. And I think that is really meaningful because, and kind of like what you alluded to, it's not just holding this dream or this wish out there of oh, wouldn't it be nice or wouldn't it be amazing if this thing happened? But instead it's there are steps that I could take. There is a journey I could go on. There is a becoming that happens as I pursue this dream. So it's a mix of thoughts or ideas backed by action steps along that journey. And I think that is really kind of amazing. And then as you were talking before you actually mentioned Martin Luther King, his I Had a Dream speech also came to my mind. And then really quickly after, I was kind of thinking, in essence, his dream was about equality. His dream was arriving at this place where people are treated fairly, where people are treated equitably. And that then really quickly led me to a more modern day use of the term dream, which is these dreamers, these people, who are here in the United States, but weren't born here in the United States. And we talk about the American dream, achieving this level of success or having this sense of freedom or being able to live in a free land. And this whole group of people who came as children have been deemed dreamers, right? And in some sense, we've said they have hope of achieving what it is to be American, but they're kind of in this limbo place of will they arrive there? Will they achieve that or not? And we have sometimes called them dreamers. And I think that there's something, as we kind of layer hope back onto that, they can only have that title or that categorization of a dreamer if hope exists. Because if hope becomes something elusive, or if hope is removed from their situation, then the title or the label that they get or that they use becomes something different than I'm dreaming of this thing, or we are dreamers. And so I think the title or the distinction only makes sense if hope is present in that situation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and brings it back to the central conversation point in this podcast is what hope can do for people who make use of it and how it shows up in all these different iterations and slices that we're talking about. And I think there is sometimes a temptation to think of dreaming as potentially a derogatory thing. It's like if you're a dreamer, if you're just someone who's in the clouds, you're just someone who, is less in touch with reality or less in touch with the action that real life requires, that somehow makes you less effective, less productive, less successful. But really, to dream means to be in pursuit of something. It means exactly the opposite. It means that you have hope for something, and that hope is defining how you're interacting with your life. We were just talking about stories and creative uses of dreaming imagery. If they introduce a dream that a character has at the beginning of a story or a movie or something, you better believe that's going to define how that character interacts with the rest of that story. Every time they talk to someone, every time they make a decision, or every option that comes up to them, they're going to be informed by, here's the thing that I'm dreaming of, here's the future that I want, here's what I want to become. Even if you think of people in real life circumstances, if someone says, I always had a dream of becoming this, and I've lived my life with that in mind, I'm in pursuit of this thing, that says a lot about that person and has probably informed how they live their life and how they've made choices as they're moving along. Maybe they decided a certain track of education that they needed, or a certain kind of social group that they're falling into, a certain place they needed to live, or certain ways they spend their extra time. To be in pursuit of something is going to mean quite a lot about how you live your life and what you do. And I think the absence of that also is quite defining. To say, I always dreamed of becoming something, but I'm going to do nothing about it. Or I can't spare whatever it takes to try to follow that dream. There's something sorrowful about that. There's something like emptying about that. And I think that says a lot about how much a dream can mean and how integral that could be to moving towards whatever the thing is that you might want.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of came up for me as I was thinking about this is that the synonym that we mentioned right at the beginning, which is design. And I was trying to think, like, how does that make sense in this idea of dream, which actually led me to just a variation of the word dream, or a different iteration of the word dream, which is a vision. Sometimes we think about like having a dream or a vision as like seeing something before it happens,
right.
And I think oftentimes if we changed the word from dream to vision, then what that does is that it almost lays out like a blueprint, right? When we use the word vision, it's like, I know with certainty this thing is going to happen. We see steps of getting there, or we see the end result of that. And so all of a sudden this design, it's something predetermined. And now it's just like me realizing the design, or putting the steps in place that create this thing that I've seen already, or this vision that I have of the end result. And so I think sometimes, again, kind of then mapping that, like holding a vision onto this journey, inevitably when we follow the protagonist along the journey, they encounter pitfalls or challenges or things that might get in the way or try to thwart their arrival at that final destination. But it's usually like this vision, the assurance of that vision that like carries them through. And they think, oh, I have to get to this thing in order to accomplish this thing or in order to make this event happen. And that is it's worth getting there. And so I have to overcome these obstacles. And I think that it speaks to one of the roles of hope along this journey. That when I hold on to hope, when I have this clear sense of why I'm doing what I'm doing or what the outcome is going to be, then when I encounter difficulties or trials or challenges or whatever, I have the determination to overcome it because I know that the end result is going to be worth it.
Yeah, the way you describe that and the way we've been describing this in general makes it sound very active, that this isn't something that just happens to you, or even if it does in some sense, you have to do something with that. And that kind of leads me to ask maybe something that might sound similar to things I've asked you past episodes, but if you are finding yourself in the position of, or being a person who has less familiarity with dreaming, less familiarity with using hope to get to wherever you're trying to go, maybe you've seen yourself as someone who isn't that forward thinking or isn't that I'm going to lean into and depend on hope. You just don't peg yourself as that kind of a person. How do you start dreaming? Where do you begin this kind of a process if it's so constructive in going on this journey and getting to where it is that you'd like to be?
That's a really good question. And I guess I have two responses to that. I just think about our clinical work, and we begin the clinical work with what are your best hopes? And oftentimes when people answer that question, what are your best hopes? They often begin by saying, well, I know I don't want this, or I know I don't want to feel like this anymore. And it's easier oftentimes when I haven't put a lot of forethought into where I want to end up. It's easier oftentimes to say, well, I know where I don't want to end up. I don't want to end up feeling this way. I don't want to end up having these thoughts. I don't want to end up interacting with people in this way. And so we as clinicians oftentimes flip it around and say, well, if you don't end up there, where would you like to end up instead? And that simple shift requires me to then employ totally different thinking. I have to think, I don't know, maybe I haven't ever thought, like, where do I want to end up? And I go back to, Alice in Wonderland and Lewis Carroll's book, and the Cheshire Cat in essence says, like, where do you want to end up? And she says, well, I don't really know. I've never been here before. So I guess I just want to go anywhere. And the Cheshire Cat says, well, if you don't know where you want to go, it doesn't matter which way you go. Any way you go will get you to where you're going. And I think that's what I would say is you begin simply by investigating, thinking about where do I want to go? So I think that's step one. And then I think step two follows along with exactly what we do as clinicians after that. We try to break down in as many details as possible. Well, what would it be like if you actually got there? And so I think that is an exercise that we can go through with ourselves. If I go through and I say, I want to be a good student. Well, I start thinking about what I need to be like if I'm going to be a good student. If I think about, I want to be a partner that my partner can rely on. I start to break that down and say, well, what would make me reliable? And that what would make me reliable informs what steps I need to take along my journey. And so I think your question is really good because oftentimes we haven't thought, where do I want to end up? We've just gotten as far as, well, I know I don't want to end up at X place.
Yeah. I think what you're describing, you're right, is really relevant to our clinical work because that is where we start these clinical conversations and just trying to get a depiction of what is it that you actually want for yourself. And as strange as that might sound, I think that's actually kind of a foreign thought process for people. I don't think we often are prompted to really think in a very open way about what do you want? Who do you want to be? What do you want to feel? What do you want to experience? What do you want from your future? especially not in a non-judgmental, if you're not in a position of you're in trouble or you need to now begin to like fix the path that you're on because you've made some bad decisions or something like that. Just to openly be asked that, I think, is a bit of a foreign thing. And so since that is so foreign and so unfamiliar for a lot of people, I know you've spoken to this in a lot of different ways very often. What counts as a dream that is good enough to pursue and to have our lives be modified in the ways that we're talking about? I'm sure lots of people have thoughts in their heads or daydreams or passing things where they go, oh, that might be nice, or it'd be cool to experience this, or, you know, what a world this place could be if I had this and looked like this and experienced this and lived like this. And then that just kind of like drifts on by as they keep doing whatever they're doing and living the lives they're already living. So what counts as that's a thing you could tell people about. That's a thing you could hold up, you know, in front of you and say, that's what I'm living towards. That's what I'm working towards. You know, how many dreams do any of us have that we wouldn't write a speech about? We wouldn't, you know, declare to other people, I had this dream and here's the thing that I really see for my future, for our future. Yeah. How do you know when you've got a thing that's worth making this big commotion about and making this much effort towards?
This might sound like a cop-out answer. So if it is, then just push back on me a bit.
Gladly.
But I think the reality is anything is potentially good enough. If I were to quantify, like, you have to make it over this bar in order for your dream to be a worthwhile dream, I would be placing my worldview on someone's dream. And I think we're all totally different, and where we come from is totally different. So something that seems like vastly unachievable to me might seem very simple and really achievable to somebody else because our starting point might be very different. And so I guess what I would say is, instead of focusing on like what's good enough, I would say let's just focus on starting. And again, I kind of think about it as that journey. I don't know if this is a real unit of measurement or if this is a joke of a measurement, but I remember somebody telling me once they used to measure things in what they called farsies, and it was how far you can see, right? And I think that if I start, I want to reach as far over there as I can see. That doesn't mean that is going to be the ultimate destination for me, but it is worth moving to that far-see place. And when I get there, I can celebrate, like, look how far I made it. And I am different and I'm changed. And presumably my lungs are more fit and my legs are going to carry me better than they did before. I changed in the process of getting to this place. But it's only when I get to that place that I realize, oh, there's another far sea out there. I could potentially make it there too. I don't need to know that there's a second or third or 100th far sea out there when I begin. But that doesn't make that first far sea journey irrelevant. I need that first one in order to realize, oh, there's something else beyond this. And so I think really what we're getting at is hope is iterative. I can look as far as I can look, and I can have what I think is all the hope in the world. I can think this is the biggest dream I'm capable of dreaming. And then I get to that dream and I realize I could actually dream bigger than this. And I think lots and lots of people do that. I was reading a book recently. It's called Becoming Dr. Q, and it's about this guy. He's originally from Mexico and comes to the US as a migrant worker. And when he came, he started going to a community college simply to learn English. He just wanted to learn enough English that he could communicate a bit better as a migrant worker. And while he was in community college, he realized he could actually get a degree. He could get an associate's degree. He didn't know the education system. And so he thought, I'm going to get this degree, and that's this huge mark of success. That's the end. And he got to his final semester and he met with his academic advisor, and his academic advisor said, where are you going to go to get a bachelor's degree? And he said, what are you talking about? And he said, well, you get this associate's degree, which then helps you. Usually people would transfer to another school. They would finish up in a particular major and then are more equipped to get a job because now they've specialized in something rather than just getting this associate's degree, which tends to be just kind of a general degree. And he had no idea that that was the next step. He dreamt of originally learning English, and then he dreamt of getting an associate's degree, and he thought, that's as far as I can see. When he got close enough and somebody said, hey, do you see what is a bit farther out there? All of a sudden he realized, oh, there's more hope to be had. And he goes to get a bachelor's degree at Berkeley, and then he goes on to get a medical degree at Harvard, and then he goes on to do postgraduate work at Johns Hopkins. And I mean, obviously his limit just kept getting higher and higher and higher, but it was a discovery each step of the way that all of a sudden when he arrived, he said, I can see farther than I could before. And I think that's what I would say is to judge someone's original dream as too small or too big or whatever it is seems unjust, because their vision will change as they move toward that dream, and they'll achieve what their expanded vision allows them to achieve.
Yeah, it's what that really says to me is that, and it sounds so obvious, in these terms now, but the people with the biggest appetite are probably going to eat more. The people who dream and say, here's the stuff that I want for myself. Here's, without letting obstacles shrink my discernment for what I can say I want. Here's all the things that I'm setting out and saying is possible for me and what I would like and what I'm pursuing. Of course, you're going to come out with more in the end. And when those options become available to you, like they did for Dr. Q in his narrative, to be able to say, sure, yes, I'm going to go for that. That's possible for me. I'm going to include that in my new array of what I think I'd like to see. And I think there's something really inspiring about that too, because I think oftentimes very competent, very capable, very talented, very, whatever people can hinder themselves by limiting how much they're dreaming of for themselves or how much they're hoping for themselves. Or maybe they think I'm not that kind of a person, or talent, the ability I have isn't special enough or isn't strong enough to take me as far as some of these bigger dreams might require. And I think it's really the opposite kind of thinking that's true, is forget what you think you have or don't have. The dream itself, have the, I want this thing, and that'll take you to places you might not have imagined you were capable of going to. It reminds me of my younger brother. There's 8 of us, and he was the youngest, and I'm the next oldest, a few years older than him. And I just remember always thinking when we were younger how fantastical his thinking was and how ridiculous he was. And I just thought he was just the most illogical person. I remember when he was 9 or 10, he said he wanted to be a chef, and he would, watch the Cooking Network all day long, and he would read lots of books and cooking recipe books and all this stuff. And he would say, I want to be a chef. And we would think oh, so you're going to go to cooking school? When you grow up, you want to be a chef or something? He's like, no, as soon as possible. I'm going to go be a chef, any minute now, maybe next year. And we would be that's ridiculous. Why would you think you could just be a chef right now? Who's going to hire a 10-year-old chef or something like that? But he really lived at any moment he could be called up to be a chef at a restaurant. He would wake up early in the morning and watch all those morning network cooking shows, and he would test out recipes in the kitchen. And he's a little kid who how many little kids are trying to bake a chicken or do all these different kind of complicated recipes. And I think there's something inspiring in that, just in having the, no pun intended, appetite for the thing, saying this is what I want, this is who I want to be, regardless of what reality says about how likely that is or what that really could look like if it came true. It still pushed him in a direction to really make some incredible things happen, to really sculpt who he was and what he was doing. I think that really breaks some boundaries in terms of what you think you're capable of, regardless of how you think that thing is unachievable or not.
Yeah, one of the things that I really, really love about that is, in some sense, it doesn't even matter if somebody arrives at that final place, right? It doesn't even matter if he becomes a chef. Mm-hmm.
He did not, by the way.
In pursuing that dream, right, he develops skills and attributes and abilities, and those, improves reading, can increase his creativity, can learn how to mix ingredients together, can, all kinds of skills that maybe he needs in order to become something else. And again, I think sometimes, maybe this is taking the metaphor as far as you can see too far, but sometimes we think we can see something out in the distance, but it ends up being a mirage. It ends up being something that we actually didn't quite see with clarity. But by pursuing it, we become something. And then when we get close enough, when we realize, oh, that's not actually what I thought it was, we can then look around and be like, well, now that I'm here, what can I see that I couldn't see from back there? And so even if we don't arrive at the actual location where we thought we were going to arrive, moving in pursuit of that dream is in and of itself potentially beneficial.
Yeah, no, exactly. You can't go wrong, right? You won't come out with a lesser version of yourself in any way. You might even be more of who you wanted to be without you even having originally specified that's the ways you want it to be changed. That's the ways you want it to grow. It's very much a journey that you go on in trying to go towards the thing that you want. And anyone who makes an effort to move along a journey towards something comes out for the better on the other side, whether you literally have the thing you wanted in the first place or not.
Yeah, I think I just really appreciate this idea of dreaming as an expression of hope. Is there anything else that you feel like we should add or get to before we wrap it up?
I never have any doubts that we have said plenty and that in the future we'll say plenty more to cover our tracks.
True. Well, I hope that was a meaningful conversation. I think I heard you say some things and I heard myself say some things that I think got me to a bit more clarity than I had before we walked that journey. So I think this conversation was illustrative of that process in and of itself. But for those of you listening, if this was a useful conversation, if you can think of somebody who could really benefit from thinking about hope in the form of dreaming, please feel free to share this episode with them. We would really appreciate that. Also, please leave us any thoughts or questions you have that might inform our next conversations. But in the meantime, until we chat with you again, go out there and make hopeful dreams.